You're listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast, where we explore the connection between running and positive mental health. We do this by talking to runners from all walks of life who generously share their experiences with us. So you don't miss an episode, I've created an email list for you to join. Check the show notes for more details. Without further ado, I am your host, Michelle Frost. Let's get moving. In this episode of the FitMIND FitBODY podcast, we meet Dr. Iestyn Lewis, a runner whose life journey is as diverse as the trails he explores. From the United Kingdom hills to the Australian terrains, Iestyn's story is a blend of endurance, adventure, and life's unexpected turns. Join us for an inspiring chat that goes beyond running. Let's dive in. Today on FitMIND FitBODY, I'm excited to introduce you all to Iestyn Lewis. Hello, Iestyn.
Hi, how are you going?
Really good. I have never met Iestyn, just like many guests on the podcast before. So you're all going to get to know him a little bit at the same time as I am. So I'm very excited. Again, you've been another referral from Cheryl, which has been amazing. Cheryl Martin, a previous guest. She's referred quite a few awesome podcast guests. And I'm not trying to set you up to say that you have to be like awesome. I'm sure you'll be amazing anyway. So no pressure. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. I'd like to start with, where did you grow up?
So I'm from the UK, although I'm currently living in Hobart in Tasmania.
Yeah.
I've grown up in various parts of the UK. So in Cumbria on the sort of in the north on the Scottish border near the English Lake District.
Oh,
and then when I was 9, my parents moved to the south coast. So Poole in Dorset, which is this lovely coastal area on the south coast. And that's where I went to school and started running. And then ultimately I went to university in Sheffield. On the
back up again, isn't it? That's like, so you're up, down, and then back to the middle-ish sort of area. Is that right?
Yeah. And then I went to uni there and worked there for 3 years. So I was in Sheffield for 9 years in total.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved to New Zealand for a couple of years before moving to Melbourne and ending up in Hobart almost 15 years ago.
Holy moly, you've been all over the place. You're very well travelled.
So yeah, I've been moving around, and pretty much running has been a part of my life to some degree in most of those areas ever since I was sort of in middle school, really. Do
you remember at school what you thought about running? Like, did you do it just because they said, we all run today, or there's an event that everybody has to go into? Or do you doing it for the love of it?
I was rubbish at running as a kid. So in sort of middle school, I'm just trying to relate that to where my kids are at the moment. So this I would have been maybe 10 or 11.
Yeah.
I had friends, they were runners, they were really good. I was always behind them. And then I think, puberty happened and that changed. And suddenly I could run, and that was pretty amazing. Wow. And I was actually a pretty good middle distance runner. So I did a lot of cross country, and that's what I did through high school.
And do you think it was because you became, as you said, when you hit puberty, you kind of grew into it and felt like you were doing well? Was that an important element for you for continuing to run through that period?
I had been running. It's just, one summer puberty hit and I was suddenly stronger and faster. And that just continued. I was good at running. I enjoyed doing it. It strangely actually wasn't my passion, but I was good at it.
What was your passion?
I developed again early in high school, and I wanted to rock climb. And this would have been in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to get into rock climbing now as a child. but in the early 90s, that seemed to involve lying about your age to get into whatever remnant of a climbing wall
Wow.
was around, and tagging along with people. So I was trying to get into that, but I was
That's
running,
interesting.
and I enjoyed running, but I was always also wanting to go climbing. And those two sports, I think, have some ways, they run their own race with each other.
Mm.
Sometimes I'm running a lot,
Yeah.
and sometimes I want to climb, and sometimes there's big gaps where I don't do one of them.
I have
So
two. I have five children. Two of them are still at home. The
yeah,
younger two, one just turned 20 and the other one's 21 going on 22. The 21 and the 20-year-old are addicted to indoor climbing here
yeah,
in Launceston. So they go to the
yeah.
better park here or whatever it's
Oh
called.
yes,
And they love it. In fact, that's where they are right now. As we're talking, they're off doing their indoor climbing. So
it's pretty addictive,
mm.
and yeah, particularly when you're in your early 20s, it's very addictive. So that's what I did for most of my early 20s. But I have this sort of relationship with running where I come in and out of it.
Yeah.
And there was then sort of when I left the UK about 17, 18 years ago, that sort of I'd been running a lot in the few years before that, but that really drove me into this kind of I am now running all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
yeah.
Just going back a little bit, do you have like siblings and things like that and like growing up, or were you
I do. I've got
about
two
that?
sisters. One
Yep.
is not athletic at all.
Yep.
My middle sister is is not athletic, but is one of the most inspiring people to decide she's going to do a challenge and make it happen.
Yeah.
And I did one of her sort of early ultras with her about 7 years ago, and that's just one of the most memorable things that I've ever
Oh,
done. And I'm sure we'll get to that because yeah, that's one of the highlights of the running I've done, and I've done a lot of running.
oh, I love that. Sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to hearing that story. Were your parents very outdoorsy or sporty? What was your no?
No, not particularly.
No.
They weren't particularly. I mean, we went outdoors, we did bushwalks and
Yeah.
things, but on a very kind of ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
They've always been very supportive of what
Mhm.
any of us have done,
Yeah.
um, but they, yeah, not in the same way that my kids are currently go outdoors and have the opportunity to do outdoor pursuits.
Yeah.
It's what wasn't quite the same. Yeah, so a lot of this was driven by me.
Is that just the comparison between your childhood and your children's childhood? Is that, do you think, related to Australia? It's considered to be quite an outdoorsy country. I know there's a lot of outdoors people in the UK, but it's doesn't seem to
I,
be has the culture is not quite as adventurous.
um, I,
I don't know.
there may well be a generational thing. I don't think it's
Mm,
necessarily a country thing because
mm.
friends I have in the
Okay,
UK
that's a good
do
point. Mm.
equal things with their equal outdoor
Yep.
activities with their children now.
Mm.
And certainly I've met plenty of people whose parents, 30 years ago were taking their kids outdoors regularly.
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
it's probably those people who are really into the outdoors will always take their kids outdoors, and I
Yeah.
don't necessarily think that's a divide. I think Tasmania, and I can only really speak for Hobart, is particularly unique in the amount of people in one area who are doing these things with their
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Um, so what did you do at uni? What did you do at uni in Sheffield?
So I'm a doctor.
Yep.
So I did medicine at uni,
Mhm.
and then did junior doctor. Started my junior doctor training in and around South Yorkshire, which is
Yep.
around Sheffield.
Yep.
6 years at uni, 3 years working there, and then decided to go overseas for a year, and ended up in New Zealand, where I ended up doing my postgraduate training, specialist
Yep.
training, and that's been an adventure in itself. So I'm primarily an emergency physician, and I've been an emergency specialist for since 2012.
Oh wow.
But since then, I've also developed subspecialties in hyperbaric and diving medicine,
Mhm.
and through that, that's evolved into chronic and complex wound management.
Oh, wow.
And then combining all of those, I now run a hospital in the home service down in Hobart,
Mhm.
where we try and keep quite sick people out of hospital,
Yeah.
and manage them in the community.
Oh,
So
wow. You need to go running and climbing a lot with all that stuff going on.
yeah, I suppose so. Running does, yeah, it's kind of self therapy for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you remember, were you running at university at Sheffield?
I I ran a lot through high school,
Hmm.
and then I got to university, and Sheffield is a big climbing centre.
Okay.
And for the first probably 3 years at university, I was completely obsessed, like your sons, with climbing,
Yeah.
and did lots of climbing outside and lots of climbing trips. I was still running. I would still go off and decide, oh, I'll enter this half marathon. And during that time, I did my first ultra marathons, although I didn't even know that's what they were. And then throughout the latter part of university, I started to get a little bit scared of the type of climbing I was doing,
Okay.
and sort of had a little bit more of a sense of my own mortality.
Mm.
And I drifted back out of climbing into trail running, essentially.
Hmm.
But the type of running that I was doing in the UK is called fell running
Yep.
and
Falling down
mountain
hills.
mountains. Yeah, falling down hills with style.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's
Controlled
yeah,
falling.
and it's a lot of it's off track as well.
Yeah.
So it's this very adventurous style of running. It's quite
Yeah.
different to running here. And in that would have been in the early 2000s, and it was a
Okay.
dying sport. At that
Yeah.
point, in my mid 20s, I was part of a very small group of young people doing
Hmm.
that sport.
Hmm.
Most of the runners would have been in their late 40s up to their mid 60s,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was this weird dying sport, and all of that has changed in the last 20 years.
That's incredible. I actually have had someone, an Australian who, like you, quite a bit of a traveler on the
Mm.
podcast. Ben, I think, maybe a year and a half ago. And he talked about traveling over there and like in Wales and things and doing some fell running. And there's a picture of him on his podcast episode where it does look like he's falling down a hill. It just
it's
crazy.
it's falling with style, and
Yeah.
there's so many little races attached to summer village fairs, and then there's just a series. And with the population density, there was certainly periods where if I wanted to race 4 times a week, I could do that through the summer.
Wow.
So you never needed to do any training. You could
Amazing.
just enter races. So and that was a lot of fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then the mountain marathon scene uh, was a series of, they're usually 2 day events
Yeah.
where you have to carry all your equipment. You run in a pair. They're a
Hmm.
navigation race.
Oh, wow.
So you basically, on the start line, are given a map,
Hmm.
and the map has the checkpoints you have to run through. And these checkpoints can be often quite hard to find. And
Yeah.
you navigate between the checkpoints, and depending on the class of race it is, will depend on the distance. So
Okay.
the lowest classes may only be 15 kilometers each
Hmm.
day. The highest classes will be the best part of a marathon each
Oh,
day.
wow.
But that's the straight line distance
Mm.
between the points, and you may not be running the straight line distance.
Yeah.
So, and you run with your partner, and you have a tiny pack and a very light tent and a stove on some very lightweight gear, and you go
Off you
running
go.
for 2 days.
It sounds like extreme regaining. Although regaining can be extreme as well, can't it?
It is a little bit like row gaining, except you have to camp in the middle.
Yeah, that's when
Yeah.
you said the tent. I went, oh no, that's not regaining, as far as I know. Anyway,
So some of the divisions within those events are very much row gaining
Mhm.
events. You've got a time limit, and the checkpoints are worth points.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
so
wow.
we had a lot of fun doing those. Um, yeah, a lot of fun running around mountains. And at this point, I didn't even really know what an ultra was. I mean, I think I did my first ultra. I was thinking about this the other day in 1996, and I was 19. It was actually called the Spider Walk. It was around Sheffield, and it took me 17 hours. And I was
Mm.
broken for weeks afterwards, but I had no idea. A housemate suggested I do it. Um,
Wow.
and then I think it was probably on my third ultra, I saw somebody with a running club ultra team vest on. And I'm like, what is this ultra? It just wasn't a thing. It was not a thing.
You didn't do that. I think, oh, look, I've run a 5K. Now I've run a 10. I might do a half marathon. Well, now I've done a half marathon. I'm going to do a marathon. And then you get to the half marathon. I'm going to do an ultra. But no, you didn't do that kind of progression by the
No,
sound of
I not 18, 19. I was a specialist 800-meter runner,
it. Wow.
and I might occasionally do an hour and a half run, which actually would probably get me somewhere close to 18 or 20K at that point. Um, and yeah, a housemate said, "Do you want to do this? Let's do this. We can walk around."
Wow.
Yeah,
And you did.
so
And
I
then you
just
couldn't
went,
walk
"Oh,
around
okay."
later.
Oh, I was a mess. I was a mess. I think I had tendonitis in one of my, you know, legs for months after that. It was,
That's amazing.
yeah. And yet somehow I decided a year later that a 60K loop in the middle of the night around some frozen bogs would also be an exciting thing to try. Still didn't know what an ultra was.
So, what drives you, do you think, even at that young age, to take on these adventures, these yeah, events, which are more
It
than
just
just going out for a 10K run or whatever?
it just seemed like a silly thing to do. Are you going to get round? You know, I know that I can do 10K, and I in fact 10K is a distance I do all the time, and I
Yeah.
love running 10Ks. Um, it's just a silly thing to do with your friends. I think
Yeah.
uh, I have done a lot of mini adventures. They're
Yeah.
convenient adventures.
Mm.
I mean, if there are obviously lots of adventurers out there, and they do these fabulous expeditions that are just so far beyond the realm of what any of us can do in our day-to-day lives.
Mm.
You can go and climb Everest or walk across a polar ice shelf or do the Appalachian Trail, but
Yeah.
it's going to take months out of your life.
Yeah. Lots of
Whereas
preparation and
lots and I'm not saying that my adventures don't take preparation.
mm.
I'm some more than others, but most of us can take the odd day out of our lives from time to time and go and have some wacky adventure, which will be memorable, and you'll probably suffer and stuff will go wrong, but you'll have a lot to talk about, a lot to tell your grandkids about one day, and it's just a bit different, really.
So, how does it make you feel? Like trying to get
Oh,
to the essence of doing these things and coming up with, it's a whole process, isn't it? Like you even hear people when they talk about um, going on holiday, for example. It's often the holiday, it's fine, but it's all the thinking and the preparation and the leading up to it that if you were to really examine it and think about it honestly, sometimes some of that is almost as fun as the holiday itself. It's the anticipation. I don't know what the word is.
oh, absolutely.
Have
I
that.
mean, you can spend, I suppose, some adventures I've spent a vast amount of time thinking
Mm.
about.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stage races I've done in the past. I mean, the first stage race I did, which is this race called the Dragon's Back, which I did 8 years ago, I knew I was going to do that about 18 months out from that.
Okay.
And I had come off a period where I was doing all my specialist exams and hadn't been running that much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd finished that. And that was a focus for 18 months.
Mm.
But the when I did in the UK, part of these various fell running challenges, there's a number of, they're called rounds. There's one
Mm-hmm.
in England, Scotland, and Wales. The one in England is called the Bob Graham Round.
Yeah.
It's about 100 kilometers,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got 24 hours to do it.
Yeah.
But it's mostly off track, and there is about 10,000 meters of ascent,
Oh,
which,
wow.
if you think about the UTMB, no, sorry, UTA, that's 100K. It's 4,500 meters of ascent, and it's on semi-groomed tracks.
Mm-hmm.
This is a totally different proposition, and I was supposed to be racing with a partner the week on the weekend. Some friends were doing it, and the week before, my partner dislocated his elbow, and I was
Oh,
suddenly
wow.
without a partner for a mountain marathon. So that
Wow.
was, I'm just going to jump on this with you. So there wasn't much preparation in that. Those had about
Wow.
48 hours to prepare
Yeah.
to do that, and that was, yeah, I mean, that was incredibly memorable doing that. And it's the last big run I did before I left the UK. So it's sort of, yeah, I knew I maybe had an inkling that it could be longer than a year, and I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sure when I would get this opportunity again. So I
Yeah.
just had to take the opportunity to
Yeah.
do it. So
What is it in these races that you find the most memorable, or these events? Like, what is it? Like, you said it a few times that, yeah, the memories that are created and those kind of, what's the essence of those memories that you take with you after an event?
um, it's just so different from your day to day life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of type 2 fun in doing these
Mm-hmm.
events, in preparing for these events.
Yeah.
Why am I here? It is
Yeah.
raining. I am lost. Don't mess up. You will die of hypothermia.
Mm.
It's like, why am I at home? Um, but equally, there's that feeling of being quite alive in those moments, and knowing that all the decisions going forward that will get you out of this situation are yours and yours alone.
Mm-hmm.
And just a degree of, there's a lot of independence in that. And
Mm.
yeah, and
Yes.
and often you don't have that level of independence and freedom in things that you do. You have obligations to,
Yeah.
all sorts of other people, organizations, society. But in the
Those
yeah,
moments.
in those moments,
Mm.
those decisions are all yours, and nature doesn't care what you do, but you do.
I've just come back from a couple of weeks of hiking, or tramping, as they call
Oh
it in
yeah,
New Zealand.
isn't
In
that
New Zealand,
wonderful?
which is amazingly, like, you've lived there. I'm like, I've never been here. Why have I never been here? This is just like incredible.
Where
Um,
did you go?
we did the Heafy track and the Paparoa track in the
Right.
South Island. They were just
Yep.
beautiful. But there's those moments, like, because you don't have any internet, because you're like, your days are just walking, when you're in that sort of
Yeah.
environment, you're in that, doing that kind of activity, which is very similar to when you're doing an ultra race or whatever. That the only thing that's really important, it strips back down all the decisions you're making, all of the things that you're doing are the next step, the next time
Yeah.
you have shelter and where you're going to eat. And so it brings our existence almost down to what we really need, and not all the other stuff that we fill our lives full of, if that makes sense.
It does totally put you into the moment,
Mm.
and your decisions now will affect significant decisions in the next few
Mm.
hours. So
Mm-hmm.
are you eating enough right now?
Yeah.
Is this the right, navigation here? Am I
Mm.
going the right way? Sometimes you're not. That just and it just costs you so much time. Um, am I warm enough? You know,
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
you have to be aware of that the whole time. It's so
Mm.
easy to mess up, particularly if you're on your own. Um, and you just have to be fully aware and fully present in those
Mm.
moments.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
and those moments might be 12 or 24 hours of the
Yeah.
same moment, but you do have to be present.
How do you train for that?
mostly just doing lots of running, and just going out and having fun. Most of my running training over the last 25 years has been probably fairly unstructured, and I just want to go out and run, and sometimes I run fast, if I've been doing a lot of racing, and if I've been doing stage racing or very long runs, then I generally try and put in some quite long runs. And I know that lots of very good athletes don't do that. But if I have been, if you're racing basically an ultra a day for a week or 8 days, you probably need to go and run some marathon length runs back to back over a number of days, just to make sure that you can handle that load and that level of, I'm tired, everything hurts, I have to put my shoes back on and go out again. Usually loosen up pretty quickly, but that first hour is usually quite hard.
A bit challenging. What's your favorite kind of racing now?
I'm actually on a break from racing.
I even hate that word because I don't really like competition now. I'm older and pretty crappy at it. So I like events.
I think I actually haven't raced for about 18 months. I was at a race 18 months ago and I suddenly just didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And so I'm currently in a bit of a phase where my running is much more casual than it has been for the last 15 years. But the types of racing I really like, small races.
Yeah.
I quite like small races. I quite like them probably around the 25 to 30K distance is probably my most ideal distance. And I keep reminding myself that when I keep entering longer races or have entered longer races, and you have those low moments in races, as you know, and we'll be at 50, 60K. I'm like, why am I doing this? I like 30K races. Of course, I still keep going back, so I must like those long races too. The rougher the ground and the rougher the weather, the happier I am.
Okay.
I think is the bottom line. I don't mind bad weather. I don't mind rough ground. So the more rugged it is, and really over the last few years, I haven't really been racing that much, but I have been doing lots of sort of Tasmanian adventures.
And there's heaps available here, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And they're all really hard. Compared to running in Europe or the US, they're really hard. I'm not sure people really appreciate how difficult the ground is compared to elsewhere.
I know the hike, like we're used to doing bushwalks here.
Yeah.
The hikes in New Zealand, I think it was the ones we chose as well, because they're also groomed for mountain biking as well.
Yeah.
But, it might be, go up, I don't know, I'm going to get that wrong, but say 1,000 meters or whatever. And instead of it going sort of straight up like they would in Tassie almost, or not quite straight up, but go up pretty quickly, there's quite, they do switchbacks and they do all this other stuff, which makes the gradient it hardly felt like we're walking up most of the time, is what I'm saying.
Mountain bikers make really good trails for running.
Yes, and it would have therefore been quite easy to run, I think. In fact, they do run a lot of those. So, and we saw some runners out there, which was very pleasant. I quite liked it. I wonder sometimes, when conditions are ordinary and challenging, that sense of satisfaction when you finish is even heightened because you've had an experience with the weather or the terrain or whatever that you've survived and been able to, and you're still standing.
I think so. I think it just makes it all a little bit more raw, really, and it adds to that decision-making process of eating and making sure you're clothed properly and not messing up the navigation, and it increases the stakes in some ways, but it just adds to the interest. And a lot of the runs I've done over the last few years have essentially, we've had fixed dates when we can do them.
Okay.
So it's not, I don't have the luxury of waiting for some fabulous weather
Mm.
window to
Yeah.
go and do it. I've got 2 days off, and it coincides with, the small group of friends I often do these with.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it. We
Mm.
A couple of years ago, they've added a few more now, but the wilder trails that
Yes.
Find Your Feet to have
Yep.
badges for,
Yep.
I think there's 14 now. But 13, something like that. But a couple of years ago there was only 9 of them,
Mm-hmm.
and we were just out of COVID, so travel was still hard. I hadn't raced in a while, and a friend and I decided that we would just do all 9 of them back to back and just
Wow.
drive between them all for over a few days. I hadn't actually taken into account the 1,500 kilometers of driving that
Yeah. Mm.
but that was the idea. It was an idea that we made happen as we were driving between the runs. But the window we had to do that,
Mm.
there was a large storm cell coming in
Oh
over
no.
Tasmania. So we went anyway. We just, and for 2 of those runs were pretty horrible because they were being run in a storm.
Oh wow.
So, but we made it work. We had done most of them before. We had downloaded the GPX files onto our
Yeah.
watches. We did some silly things that did reduce the margin for error at one
Mm.
point, which we needed to correct later. But we left Hobart at 4 o'clock one morning and drove out to Cape Raoul, and then moved on to Maria Island and up to Freycinet, where we camped. And then we went up to St. Helens and did the humbug, and over to Penguin. And then we drove to Cradle Mountain and slept in the car, and got up the next morning and ran round Cradle, drove down to Mount Fields where we hit the first storm, came back to Hobart, went up Mount Wellington. The storm was well established by then. And the next morning, the storm had burnt out, and we went down to Bruny Island and ran the last one.
That sounds awesome. I'm jealous. That sounds
And
really good. I mean, apart from
that
the
was
storms bit, but it's really good.
we had 3 days, couldn't really go anywhere, so we just made up an adventure to go and have.
It's so good. I love that. I actually quite like running in stormy weather too, as long as you're safe. But there's something about, stepping out into that crazy, there's almost ions. It feels fresher. It feels like you're alive. It feels like everything is, the world's sort of, I don't know, shaking a
Well,
bit. It just feels awesome. I quite
I
like
mean, it does come down to each of those consequences, each of those decisions that you're making on a run, and you make thousands of
that.
decisions,
Mm,
and most of them are subconscious, but they actually have, they matter. They
mm.
you, they really focus you and put you into that moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. So with your running, tell
Yeah.
me, um, and first I wanted to ask a bit about how it might have supported you while you were at school, while you were studying. And it obviously, as a doctor who's done a bunch of specialties as well, your studying didn't just stop when you finished uni. So can you talk at all to whether you felt like your running helped, or just being fitter, because it sounds like your climbing as well has played a big part of your physical, the way you've moved through the world.
I think, yeah, I do need to be active. There was one set of exams where I we came to the final exam day. And in fact, I might have finished the exams and I went for a run. The exam was in Adelaide, and I ran
Mm.
along the seafront at Glenelg, and I
Yeah.
realized that I hadn't run in 4 months,
Oh
and I
wow.
felt rubbish. And I decided that I wasn't going to study like that again. Um, so I think it's always been there. I think sometimes with study, you can get a bit too involved in that process,
Mm-hmm.
and I have made that mistake,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been a struggle. So any study I have done since then, it's making time for sort of physical activity has been important. And
Mm.
I actually process a lot of ideas and thoughts. Sometimes they're just daydreams when
Yeah.
I'm running, but
Yeah.
I problem solve a great deal when I'm running.
Yeah. A lot of people say that. Um, I found that there's a word for it. I can't think of what it is. At one point where the problem solving is really good, and then it's almost like the oxygen level in your brain has reduced so much that suddenly the your thoughts are not as clever as you think they are. But there's some a point of at which they become not so good. Prior to that, I don't know where that is exactly. Maybe it's different for everyone.
I imagine it's totally different for everyone. It depends on the day.
Yeah.
I think it probably requires you to be running enough and feel comfortable
Mhm.
enough in your running, and therefore be fit enough to do that running, that it's you're not necessarily running particularly hard. It's the sort of
Mm.
run that you could have a full conversation
Yeah.
during, which is probably
Yeah.
what most of our runs should be.
True.
And that's when that's when you can process that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and you know, as I've got older, I've got it slower, and it's become more bush jogging than running at
Mm.
times. So yeah.
What's more important to you? Is it speed or the adventures? Like, are you, because we've talked about racing a lot, i.e., racing is a competitive endeavor. Um, or is it the adventure that you're on, the experience
It
now?
it it depends,
Mhm.
because that's a spectrum, and it depends what you
Yeah.
you want. I mean, there are times when racing fast is fun.
Mm.
Racing downhill is I love running downhill. I've always loved running downhill. It's one of the things I'm better at.
Yeah.
Um, and so being able to race hard down technical descents is amazing, but you can't do it all the time. And just having days out with friends and having a chat. And
Mm.
I don't mind whether I'm running on the road or whether I'm running on, nice trails, or whether the trails are essentially unrunnable.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be out. Uh, and sometimes that's on my own, and that's fine. And I want those adventures on my own. And sometimes it's not going to work unless I'm, with somebody. So
Mm.
it's highly variable. There are
Mm.
days where I want to run fast, and there are days when I don't want to train. I actually just want to go and run something fun, and I have a sort of a list of routes on Mount Wellington that are definitely just in the fun category,
Okay.
that you just need to go and do from time to time, just to sort of re-embrace the joy. Yeah,
Yeah.
the joy of running. Because if you're building up for some multi-day stage event, you're always, have I done enough running, I
Mm-hmm.
should be, and that can get a bit boring.
Comes like a job.
It becomes a bit, yeah, it becomes a bit,
Mm.
yeah, like a job. it's
Mm.
it's there's no joy in it anymore, so you do need to remember to go and find some joy from time to time.
So those motivation type of things, what motivates you to get out there and love it in every step. Which
Yeah.
reminds me, um, what have been some of your favorite runs? They don't have to be events; it's up to you. But what have been some of your favorite? Why have you
Favorite
loved them?
one.
Mm, stick with you.
Oh, uh doing the Bob Graham round was pretty amazing. This round of 42 mountains over 100k and 10,000 plus meters. Um, that was pretty magic. Just because you're making lots of little decisions. We had an
Mhm.
amazing support team to do that, but I very specifically remember there was a moment you've got 24 hours to do the challenge. If you
Yeah.
want to be part of the club, you have to do it in under 24 hours. I mean, it's
Okay.
totally arbitrary. But if you do it over that, apparently it doesn't count. You still got round it, but you need to do it in under 24 hours. That's the aim. And we were running on a 23 and a half hour schedule. So there's not much leeway there. And we were
No.
forced, there was a point and we started at 7 o'clock at night,
Mhm.
and we're trying to finish by 7 the next evening. And sometime mid morning, we were 45 minutes down on that schedule. So,
No.
so, but we're still hours out. I still had
Yeah.
about 9 hours of running to go. But I remember coming off one of the mountains, and the because it was now day, the group was beginning to break up, and I was just this sense of sort of strength and determination that I was not going to lose that 45 minutes. We were going to gain that back.
Wow.
And and that sticks with me because it was such an amazing event. um Dragon's Back race, which is a race along the spine of Wales.
Mm.
They've made it harder in recent years. I'm not quite sure how you can make it any harder, but it markets itself as the toughest mountain race in the world, which is fine. uh, I know the organizer of that,
Mm-hmm.
and the race when it was first run in, I think, 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And so this race was 25 years ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm.
It was run once, uh, and there's a lot of mythology around that race.
Wow.
And the pair that won it um, was a mixed team, and essentially the runner who basically dragged her male partner around, Helen Diamanites, sort of basically emerged out of the mist, running away from a group of paratroopers over
Wow.
this race. And we're probably only 25, 30 years after women were allowed to run in
In a marathon.
marathons
Yeah.
anyway. So she sort of emerged, basically dragging her partner along to win this race.
Amazing.
And then it never happened. It didn't happen for another 20 years. And we knew about this race, and my friend said, I'm going to restart it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able to do it in 2012 when he did it, but when it came round again for him to organize it in 2015, it's now a yearly race, but it was
Yeah.
sort of every couple of years. I jumped on board, and I had essentially years and decades plus of just mythology to go and test myself. And pretty much the first person who I chatted to in the when I arrived was that original winner, who's just
What?
total inspiration. She was there, and remarkably,
Amazing.
she came to find me because she knew I was from Tasmania, and she lived out here
That's
in
crazy.
about 2000. And until Hanny took the overland track record, she had held it for whatever,
What?
15 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I got to meet her. Yeah, so a bit of hero worship there. This total icon of running. Um,
I love it.
who was so far ahead of her time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was, we were told at the start of that race to look at the person next to us,
Mm-hmm.
because at least 50% of us wouldn't finish. And I was so determined not to be one of those 50%. One of those.
Wow.
So yeah. So you know, that race I was either finishing or coming off
In a
in a
stretcher?
helicopter or a body bag or
Oh
something. And I
my
was so
God.
determined to finish that race.
And you did.
Um, and I did. It was awesome. It's totally one of the. I mean, it took probably. It depends who you speak to. I think I said it took 3 months to recover from. My wife will tell you it probably took the best part of a year to recover from that race,
Wow.
because it
Wow.
was just brutal. It was 5 days of 12 to 14 hours of running a day. It was
Amazing.
horrific.
And
It
uphill
was
and
totally
down, down,
amazing.
like up and down. And
Oh yeah, yeah. Lots and lots of climbing, lots of
wow.
off track, lots of navigating at that point.
There you
So that was
go.
pretty amazing. And then a couple of years after that, I was back in the UK, and my sister said we should do a race. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And she found this 80-kilometer race in Wales, where my family's
Mhm.
from. It passed within a kilometre of her house, and it went round this peninsula, and it was marketed as run, walk, crawl. And it's an 80K race,
Yeah.
and it's got a 16-hour time limit.
Okay.
Anyway, she was saying, "Oh, it's like run, walk, crawl. We'll be fine." And I've run some of this terrain before, and in the back of my mind, I thought this might be tight if we're going to walk around it. There's a lot of steep uphills. There's a lot of there is some road, but there's a lot of beach walking. There's a lot of cliff top walking, and I thought this could be tight. But we set off, and we were the only ones, it seemed, that we were walking. And at about, I don't know, 10K in, she just looked at me and said, "We're going to come last. And I was like, that's fine." Yeah, everybody else on this beach that was about 7K long, they were at the other end, and we were just starting it. And I was sort of thinking, well, it's going to be tight. And the race started half an hour late. So I
Oh,
wasn't sure whether it was, and they hadn't said whether the course closed at midnight or not, or whether it was,
an extra
extended.
half an hour. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they hadn't said that. So we just continued walking. And I said to her, "We are going to catch people up in this race." And she just couldn't believe it in that first sort of three
Yeah.
hours. But as the day went on, we slowly began to reel in the runners at the end. And she suffered with a few blisters, which I had to quickly manage.
Mhm.
Uh, but there was this part in the dark where we actually overtook about 20 runners. We just walked up this hill and we just walked past them, and it was very sort of you know tortoise and hare type thing.
Yeah.
And I knew she was determined to finish, and I knew that our times to the cutoffs were getting tighter and tighter.
Mm.
And so in the last stages, I was actually beginning to make her run, because
Mm.
no one had told us when this course was actually closing, and we essentially got to the end with about 30 seconds before the original closing time. And it,
Whoa.
it was just awesome. I had just totally thrashed my sister to get round, and she had certainly struggled in the latter parts, but is really really a tough person. And when I just told her to get on with it, and took her bag for a bit, and helped her out, and it was just really amazing to do that with my sister, and get round this course and get across the line in the original time.
Yeah.
It's just awesome.
What an
Yeah.
experience that would have been together. That's such a
Oh, it was so good. So
it's
good. She's so determined.
it's
She's so
often like on the podcast, people talk about we tend to talk about a lot of trail running, just happens that people on the podcast tend to be trail runners often, not always, but often. And there's that experience that you have when you're all out there doing an event together that's quite challenging. Even if you're not, brother and sister or friends, by the end of it, you all feel quite connected and you're all,
yeah.
because you've had this shared experience of something quite challenging. Although it's been different for everyone, there is that sort of camaraderie that happens as a result. And I can imagine with you and your sister, it's even tighter because you went into it together and you supported each other the whole way and made
Yeah.
it to the end.
Certainly some of the friends I've made in the stage races I've done, because often you end up running with a similar group of people who are
Mm.
about your speed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a fast track to a firm friendship, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
I love that. That's a great phrase. How do you actually fit it in? Like, you have a really busy life. Like, even just like I asked you to be on the podcast maybe 2 months ago or whenever it was, maybe three, and you were busy off doing things, and obviously you have a very busy career as well, and you have a family. So how do you fit it in when you decide there's some multi-day event or something that you want to go in, and you need to do a certain amount of training to get there? How do you fit that around your life?
um my life's pretty planned.
Yeah.
um there's a lot of things that go in my diary many
Mhm.
months before.
Yeah.
um so I just allocate time to it.
Mhm.
And uh it it's rarely more than 10 hours a week anyway.
Okay.
And it's probably most of the time is less than that. So
Yeah.
if I'm just in some kind of maintenance phase
Mm-hmm.
of whatever I'm doing, this is just what I do to keep fit is the wrong, that makes it sound
Mm-hmm.
like an ordeal. But what I do on a day-to-day basis, just being active, probably comes to somewhere in the region of maybe 6 to 8 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a bit like cleaning my teeth, really. That's just fitted in, and sometimes it's before work and sometimes it's after work. And then if there are specific goals, then I have to be more organized, and that usually involves me getting up earlier,
Mm. So
which means I
as
have to go to bed earlier. But it does anything early in the morning is totally my time.
okay.
No one else in my house gets up early, so
So
if it's
it's
first
all yours.
that's mine. But you then have to be efficient. And the great thing about running is super efficient.
Mm,
If
I
you
agree.
it's so efficient. I mean, it's way more efficient than cycling.
Mm,
It's it's hours and hours more efficient than going climbing. I mean, going
mm,
climbing outside is minimum half day,
yeah.
and actually it's probably a full day. So it's running. You can be just out the house for an hour.
Mm,
You can do it before work. You can change the intensity to suit what you're trying to do. So yeah, you can fit it in if you're running. You just need to be
mm.
organized. Yeah.
I just well, I don't know if this is just my perception, but as a medical person for you, you would see lots of people who haven't chosen a lifestyle that includes regular up to 10 hours, like as you said, 10 hours of exercise in a week. Like for some people, they just wouldn't even know how to fit it into their life, let alone actually do it. Like there's that. Do you have any thoughts on how do we get people moving who aren't moving and for whatever reason it's not been a thing in their life? It's quite
Um.
a challenging.
Yeah. Oh, that easy solution.
It's that
Um.
nutmeg that whatever you call it, acorn that the medical world has been trying to work out for a long time, I assume.
I. I mean, I think things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things it's been really nice to see lots of sort of people I know who are about my age,
Mm-hmm.
some point in their mid 30s, take up some kind of exercise.
Yeah.
And I I think probably with young people we have too much of a focus on competing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the sorts of sports that we do at school, it's not really, or we used to do at school, it's not very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about running, for instance, track running is not inclusive.
No,
There's only 6 or 8 lanes on the track.
that's true.
So, and it's pretty obvious where you're coming in that. But if
Mm.
you look at road running, for instance, that's just basically a moving party over the entire course. And we don't do enough of that and make it fun and just have people that are generally active.
Mm.
It's been quite nice to come back into climbing here and just see how inclusive that is at the climbing walls, and how
Mm-hmm.
everyone, it doesn't matter how good you are, everyone seems to be rooting for you, and
Mm.
that's really nice
I've noticed that with my
to
boys.
see that.
Yeah, where
Yeah,
they are. Mm.
yeah. There are people there who are really good and people who aren't, and everyone seems to be really supportive of you doing problems. And I suspect we could probably do a little bit more focus on that kind of inclusivity. I think I the conclusion I've come to is that everyone probably needs to do a moderate amount of exercise from an early age and never stop. And that
Mm.
most of the injuries that we probably see are underuse injuries,
Yeah,
in that we weren't using our bodies and then we've decided to use our bodies and
mm.
they weren't used to it.
You're going too
Whereas if
fast.
if we
Mm.
if that was just baked into our day-to-day lives from an early age,
Mm.
that in a way that was inclusive and that we all enjoyed and was fun,
Yeah.
then it would work better. Yeah.
We
Whether
sometimes
that's possible, I have no
I
idea.
don't know, because and for each individual person, as we sort of touched on before, it's going to be different. Like what that motivator is, like,
Yeah,
and it changes. Even for me, it will change from one
yeah.
decade of my life to another decade. What inspires me to keep running, and then just the micro decisions that I make.
I,
We talk about being prepared. Like, oh, if I know I have to run early in the morning, I'll get my stuff out ready.
yeah,
So someone on the podcast said they'll go to sleep in there. They know if they have to get up really early and run, they'll actually sleep in their running clothes. I'm like,
yeah. No,
that's
no,
keen.
not doing that.
Because
Um,
the moment they put their running clothes on, they have to go run. Like it, yeah. There's
although, although I
run.
suppose that's addressing barriers to things that are stopping you. I'm
Yeah,
really hopeless at running first thing in the morning. As a general rule, I have to either have the fear of not being fit enough to do some massive race, or I have to
yeah,
meet some.
yeah.
And so you can work on those breaking those
Mm-hmm.
barriers down to
Mm-hmm.
getting you out and doing it.
Mm.
Yeah,
Was it someone else said they always have a change of clothes in the boot of their car, like a set of
yeah.
running clothes, their pair of shoes and shorts and top or whatever, so that if they find themselves at a moment in their day, they can just go for a run.
I often have all sorts of random stuff in the back of my car. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, you've probably got climbing gear as well. So two
Yeah,
bags.
there's a bag with what should I do today? Yeah.
I love it. Um, what's coming up for you? Like with running, I know you said you're in a bit of a hiatus. You don't have any particular thing, but do you have anything on the horizon that you're thinking
I
about for your running?
I think I was sort of just bringing it back to the topic we were just talking about. I think one of the things I have noticed, because I've obviously been trail running a very, very long
Mhm.
time, and it never seemed that fashionable here until the pandemic, and now
Yeah,
everyone's doing it.
it's
And
amazing.
I think there's this realization, and my wife coined the term bush jogging, which I use quite a lot now.
I love it.
Um, in that, actually, a lot of the trail running that most people are doing is it's just a fast bushwalk, and
Yeah.
bushwalking's really good, but it's really time consuming,
Mhm.
and so just doing that fast bushwalking where you're, jogging flat bits and maybe
Mhm.
running down and walking up, and that being acceptable, I think has really, really opened sort of trail running up to people. That secret that
Mm.
obviously people like me were keeping secret, that you could actually walk up the hills.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, it's so true.
yeah, I think now that secret's out, everyone's wanting in on it.
It's less
What
brutal. That's what a lot of people have said. It like than road running, or I mean, obviously than track running. It's less brutal because you can walk. That you're not always in the vision. Like for a lot of people, when they start running, or if they're feeling a little tentative, if you're running on the road or out in the public, you're very visual. Like people can see you
yeah,
and that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're running in the trails, there's an element of it's not that you're hiding, but you're not kind of on display all the time. It's kind of a weird way to think about
I
it.
hadn't I hadn't really thought of it like that. I always think of it's just less repetitive. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Mm.
change in stride
Yeah.
length.
Mm.
There's a lot of using your feet quite differently. Uh, there's yeah, you're not doing the same repetitive
Mm.
movement that you would on the road.
Yeah.
And I think that, and the ground's just not as hard. And
Mm.
yeah, you're walking bits. What's coming up for me? That is a good question. Uh, I my sort of couple of really good running buddies that I do various adventures with are sort of beginning to pester me to come up. When are we doing something? So
Mm.
I suspect what will happen over the next few months is that probably get out and may go out to the Western Arthurs again, which is always a good trip, and seems to have, since I first did it, where it was sort of shrouded in mystery, now is a really common thing to do. And the same with Frenchman's Cap. The first time I did that, that was a really rare thing to do, and now there's regularly multiple parties running it on the same day.
Wow.
I've got a friend who wants to go out to Cape Pillar, so I'll probably go and do
Mm-hmm.
that. So there's a few things that I'm sort of beginning to think about again that will get me beyond my current 10K limit,
Yeah.
which has sort of settled in over the last year or so, just because I've wanted a break from running
Yeah.
because I have, you know, most of the things I've described have happened in the last 7 or 8 years,
Wow.
and 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 there's a large list more of them. And I was probably just a bit. I just needed to do something else for a bit, so I
Yeah.
got back
Yeah.
into climbing,
Yeah.
and yeah, I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and probably ready to do a little bit more
Mhm.
running again. But whether I'm ready to race just yet is yet to be seen. But I probably do need to get an entry in for the 2025 overland track race, or I'll have to qualify again. So
Yeah.
that is on the back of my mind. If I don't get that entry in for 2025, I'll have to do some other runs to qualify. And the overland's always a good day out.
That was when I've never done that one. I've hiked it, but I've never done the run. But it was one of the ones I always wanted to do. But so I'm doing the 101 Gone Nuts, which will be
Oh
actually
yeah.
my first time over 60 Ks. So I'm nowhere
Okay.
near as distanced as you are. Um,
That's an
so
interesting race. It's a really good
yeah,
race for I have done it for support crews. It's a really
yeah,
easy race for support
access.
crews to
Yeah.
manage.
Well,
Yeah.
my husband will be pleased to hear that.
Yeah. It's
My
compared to
water
some
boy.
races, it's really easy. Yeah.
Excellent.
So that's good.
Yeah.
Pretty the middle 50K block is actually the interesting block in that race.
Okay.
The first 25 and the last 25 are less interesting.
Okay. We'll see what you mean
And
by interesting.
and there's this really frustrating bit when you come into the finish, because you
Yeah.
can see the finish and it's like 400 meters away, but you've got to run down the one side of the estuary
Oh
and
no.
get to a bridge and then run further and then come back. And I was so tempted. I was so over it by that point. I didn't have a great race that day.
Oh,
To jump in the estuary and swim across. I was so
oh
close to
wow.
just swimming across and being done. But I did finish. Yeah.
I'm doing
And
I'm I'm doing a series with there's 8 people that I'm interviewing each month
oh yeah.
for 15 minutes to see how their training's going. So it's going to be they're all keeping us
Oh,
accountable, all of us. So it's going to be
keeping you
quite
all
fun.
honest with your
Yeah,
training.
exactly. See how
Yeah.
we're feeling. So
Uh,
it's exciting.
Certainly, anything that you can get on the course for and just run segments of the course
Yeah,
is always helpful.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you get
Uh,
an opportunity to do
Go down
that,
there. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe over
yeah,
January during the holidays, which would be
yeah.
kind of fun. Um, what do you think your life would have been like had running not become such a big part of it? How's it in a positive way? What's it given your life, do you think?
Just lots of adventure,
Mm-hmm.
really. Lots of completely manageable adventures.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've done. Because to fit in a lot of the big adventures that I have a lot of friends who go off and do these amazing adventures,
Mm-hmm.
but they take months at a time.
Yeah.
Um, I, because the career I've chosen and the way I've chosen to do it, that has never really been
Possible.
feasible,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with family life. And the running I have done and moving to Tasmania has definitely made it more difficult
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many other places I could have lived where it's much more convenient to do these adventures.
Mm-hmm.
But living here, you actually you're often on your own. You're
Mm-hmm.
often in somewhere that is incredibly remote and incredibly beautiful for a short period of time,
Yeah.
and it's entirely feasible to do these things. Um, I've done lots of these things in a day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've mentioned earlier that you can steal a day. So I've got lots of day trips I've done
Yeah.
where I get up at 4 a.m, drive somewhere, run in Mount Ossa, for instance, and then come home. And that's my day. And
So nice.
I don't know if you've seen the cartoon Brave.
Oh, no, I don't think I have.
All right, so it's a Disney cartoon about a princess who's And she has these moments where there's this montage where she's riding her horse, shooting arrows and climbing mountains,
Yeah.
and that's her moment. And that's how those days
Yeah.
often feel, that I've stolen a day and I'm going to
Wow.
make the most of it.
I love it. Just squashed
So,
everything you can into
into one
every part of
day.
living. It's kind of like you squashed the
Squash
essence of
them.
living into one day.
I mean, you've obviously got to be pretty motivated to want to do it,
Mm.
but it can be done. And I
Mm.
think that's, there are so many things that if you're motivated to get up early, particularly if there's a couple
Mm.
of you, you can go and do in Tasmania in a day.
Yeah.
The drives are always the same duration.
Why did you move to Tassie?
I was in Melbourne and I hated it.
Okay.
I had a tantrum one day, having been on call all weekend, and my wife said, "What is wrong? You've been not right all weekend." And I just said, "I hate living here. I can't. I feel trapped. I
Yeah.
can't get out to. I've been used to living, within 10 minutes of
Mm.
being in nature and
Accessible.
being able
Hmm.
to go and run. And in Melbourne, I was, intermittently stealing those days and driving
Mm.
3 hours each way to go to Wilson's Promontory.
Yeah.
You can only do that so much, and
Mm.
you actually need to have those day to day. If I go and run, I can just run from my house into some forest.
Yeah.
That's important. And so we shortlisted a bunch of places that might fulfill our needs. So, we were looking to live in some kind of city. It
Hmm.
did need good access to the outdoors and ideally the sea.
Hmm.
And so somehow I ended up in Hobart. I was at a party the week before in 2009. Someone told me
Yeah.
I was committing cultural and professional suicide moving here. But seemingly Tasmania's become a really cool place to live since then.
It
And
is cool.
yeah,
I
it's
obviously
amazing. I
think
love
that.
living here.
What
So
nationality is your wife? I meant to ask earlier.
she's Australian.
She
Yeah.
is Australian. I wondered if
But
that was why you
she's
ended
from
up.
central Queensland, not
Okay.
not
Yeah.
Tasmania. So
Yeah.
this was a yeah. Neither of us can believe that we somehow ended up here.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, the Australian cultural idea of Tasmania for many years has been not necessarily a desirable place to be able to go and live, but I think that's changed a lot.
Oh, it's totally
Mm.
changed. It's
Mm.
totally changed. There's
Mm.
so many good things going for Tasmania,
Oh, it's so good. I love it, obviously.
but
Mind
it
you,
means that more and more people are coming here.
I know, which is makes it then, oh, hold on. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't complain.
I grew up on King Island though, so don't quite feel
Right.
Tasmania
Okay.
either. Because we're closer
Yeah.
to Victoria, so we feel a bit more
Yeah.
Victorian. It's kind of funny. We're very parochial, as you would
Yes.
know.
I have noticed that about Tasmania. It's very divided.
It is terrible. It's the Campbelltown or wherever that is at that line.
Yeah.
Yes, the north and the south. Um, Obviously, I often ask people a bit about their identity as a runner, and I think that you've identified yourself as a runner. I mean, feel free to say I'm wrong, but since you were a kid, you've kind of identified, as a runner and a climber, but definitely running has been part of your identity. How do you feel when or if you ever have some kind of injury that puts you out of running? How do you deal with that as an identity question?
Um, yeah, I think there are obviously identity is made up of many parts
Mm.
of you,
Yeah.
and it's it's annoying, and it can be frustrating,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the be all and end all. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the races I do, sure, you might do badly in them sometimes, but that doesn't, you know, I tend I'm not going to worry too much about that.
Yeah.
It's just part of the process. You're going to be sometimes you're going to be running really well,
Yeah.
sometimes you're going to be injured, and you just need to sort of listen to your body and manage that injury.
Yeah.
It's temporary.
Yeah.
I mean, most injuries are temporary.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, sometimes they can be catastrophic, and then
Yeah.
you probably just need to find something else that you can
Mm.
do that you can focus your interests on.
Mm.
And there's obviously with running there is a sort of physical fatigue and physical injuries that you can get with it need to be managed.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's, many of the long races, and anybody who's going to do any of these ultras, particularly if, they haven't done them before, there's going to be a massive psychological crash afterwards. You've been working towards this for a long time,
Yeah.
and there's going to be some exhaustion after that as well, and that's okay. You
Yeah.
don't have to be running really well a few days later or even a few months later,
Yeah.
depending on what it's taken out of you. And if it's something that's had a lot of meaning to you, the Dragon's Back for me was, the culmination of 15 or 20 years of running. And what was I going to do after that?
Yeah,
I was
exactly.
exhausted.
Yeah.
So that's just part of the journey. There are going to be ups and downs. And if you get to a race one day and you're like, I don't want to be here, then you probably need to go and do something else for a bit. You may come back into running. I think with the ultra thing, because obviously I've been around ultras for a very long time. I was doing them before I even knew what they were called. And there has been an explosion of them in the last 10 years, and I've sort of been witness to that. Most elite marathon runners do maybe 2 or 3 races a year. And you've got this kind of almost culture in some ultra running that the more ultras you do, the better you are, the harder you are. They all take quite a toll on you, and you probably do need to allow yourself to recover,
have the rest
from them. And and I've definitely seen people who've at races, and they seem to be at every race, and I read about them at every race for 2 years, and then they just disappear. And I think it's very easy to get very burnt out and very injured if you are doing too much. It's they're great, the feeling is amazing, but that comes at a cost, and you do need to allow yourself to recover. So I actually I've been getting more injuries since I've been in my 40s, and that has been a bit of a shock. But I've actually really had very few injuries, and I think that's because I've generally looked at a sort of a longer game and tempered out what I'm going to do. And I learned fairly early on, probably at a time when I was better at recovering, that there are certain races that wipe me out for a long period of time. So anything over 24 hours will wipe me out for weeks or months afterwards. And therefore I've started to, that's probably something I could work on, but equally that's something I probably avoid because I've got other stuff I want to do. I don't want to be wiped out for 3 months. Unless it's something worth wiping myself out for. So there is a cost to these races, and there is an aftermath, and you just need to work out quite what your goals are. And whether that cost is worthwhile.
It's interesting. I've often spoken about what it's been like after I finished. I've done a lot of marathons, and there's all that leading up to it, and then it's only for this what is quite a brief period where you have that that moment of satisfaction or whatever that you did it, and as you described a minute ago, after that it's like, well, now what? And you get that sort of, it's like it's gone. It's that fleeting sort of satisfaction which doesn't last all that long. And I think I've come to this point of working out what it is that you love about running, and that it's not just that, the satisfaction you get from crossing a line or finishing a challenge you've set for yourself, but actually working out the love of it all the time, the journey. And it's the journey that you want to be on. Like for me, and which leads to my next question, of all my life, I want to be able to run and to enjoy it all of my life. And so working out what that is, does that mean that, and it will change, and understanding it's not going to be the same. Now I'm in my 50s as it was when I was in my 30s or my 20s. It looks different, what I enjoy about my running, but being able to be flexible enough to understand what that is, and to to do that rather than always be chasing whatever that next goal is. We talked about it before, that further, more, faster, whatever it is.
I think this is probably one of the reasons that I sort of fell out of love with track running. You end up, and it's the same with any of that kind of road type racing. You very quickly end up on a road of diminishing returns. You're putting in a vast amount of effort to try and shave off, a few seconds, and if that's your goal, that's fine if you're totally in love with that, but that can sometimes, or for some people, the setbacks of that can be quite challenging. And if you want to do it for a long period of time, you probably need a slightly broader foundation on that, and you need to enjoy the training, enjoy hanging out with fellow runners or like-minded people who are on that journey with you. And there is going to be a point where you are going to get slower and it's harder to recover. And certainly when I hit 40, I noticed it was harder to recover, but I was still running incredibly well until I got to about 43. And the last 3 years have been hard. They have been hard. I've had more injuries. I feel more tired. That's something I can probably, I can adjust my training around. But there are changes now that weren't there 10 years ago, where I could do as much volume as I liked.
So you just got to embrace the new you, don't you? Yes, you just got to embrace it.
Yeah, that's hard. And so you do other things and you diversify a bit. Yeah.
How long do you think you'll have running in your life?
Oh, I'll probably always run at some point.
Excellent. That's the correct answer. No, there's no correct answer.
I just run with different people and, and have conversations with, different people. Some of those people now are, different to the ones I was running with 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah.
So how regularly do you run with others? Is that quite, I don't mean number, but like percentage wise of running by yourself or with others?
It's probably 30% running with other people. Yeah. So there's probably, particularly if you're doing a lot of volume, you're just going to have to do that on your own.
Unless somebody's training for the same thing as you.
Unless you've got a really, and I do quite like running on my own, but sometimes it's easier. So it depends what I'm trying to do, basically.
Yeah. Do you listen to stuff when you're running, or do you run with naked ears?
I have tried at times. I can never really get any headphones to fit in my ears very well. I keep thinking I should buy some of the bone conduction ones. Yeah, like those. I know that there's a Black Friday sale. It's still on for those.
Oh, 30% awesome. Off. They're awesome. I love mine, actually. I use them quite a bit.
But no, I think I actually just want to be immersed in where I'm going. So the reason I haven't bought them is because I'm not that bothered about wearing them. And I want to be hear things, and that might be cars or just
birds.
Nature.
Yeah. I love it. If somebody comes up to you and says, Iestyn, I want to start running, what do you suggest? How would you suggest a beginner runner get started? Your tips?
Well, I'd suggest they run trails.
Yeah.
And so I'm very pro trail running. I'd say they just go and wear running gear.
Oh, okay.
So they should probably have a pair of running shoes. That helps.
So not flip-flops or thongs.
Not flip-flops, not hiking boots. I think I've pretty much below the snow line worn running shoes for all mountain walking for I don't know, a very long time, 25 plus years.
I love that. And so you can just take off at any moment, basically, even when you're out for a hike.
And you just move better. So if you're in running shoes, go bushwalking and jog some bits and try jogging down and just see how it feels to be moving faster than your walking pace. And go and do some bushwalks a bit more quickly than you normally would, and see what it feels like. And see if you can capture some of the joy that you see kids, because kids do that on those trails.
Mm.
They hit a downhill, they tend to jog, they bounce better when they fall over, that's for sure. But you won't fall over. You're going to just embrace being a child, being on the trails and jogging.
Yeah, I love that. That's
Go bush
beautiful.
jogging.
That's beautiful. Bush jogging.
Go
Yes,
bush
we're
jogging.
going to coin that. That's a great phrase that your wife came up with.
Oh, my hashtag might finally take off.
Yes. Actually, I might have to make a note, put that in as a hashtag. Um, before we go, and we've kept you a long time already because it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing so much. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything about running that we haven't touched on that you would love to share?
I think the future is definitely fast packing.
Yes. Oh, I'm interested in fast packing actually.
So I think, well, two things. I think if you can run 20K, that opens up. So just the ability to run 20K means you can actually run a very long way, much further than 20K. And that opens up a vast amount of adventures, particularly in Tasmania, for you to just go and do in a fast packing style. So this is, you pack a small running pack. Now, I do, coming from a climbing mountaineering background, I do have sort of a very innate sense of what gear I should be carrying when things go wrong and I actually need to sit on a hillside and not get hypothermic. So
yeah, you also have a medical background, so that probably helps.
Oh yeah, that probably helps too. So I don't think people should go in. I'm not advocating people going into the wilderness underprepared, but there's an amazing amount of survival gear you can go and get into a 15-liter running pack, 12 to 15-liter running pack, and then you can just go and have these amazing adventures on footpaths and trails that wherever you live, and there's obviously lots of them in Tasmania. And so you can then find that you turn multi-day trails into a day run, and you can just go and do that. There's, that's you've got a parks pass that's free basically,
and you can go see all those things that people take, days to see. You can see.
And you can go and see all those things that people take photos of, and you'll find that if you can get to that sort of 20K and you're happy to jog tracks and walk up hills, that there's all this amazing wilderness out there that you can get into really quickly and really easily. And it's not, I need to take a week off work. It's, I've done it in a weekend. And gear is getting lighter and lighter. I mean, it doesn't last as long, but it does allow you to go and be efficient and have really efficient adventures. But embrace big day trips and having short adventures.
I love it. I love that. So good. Oh, thank you. You inspired me. Now I need to get my act into gear. In fact, I think my coach has set me a trail run for the weekend, so I need to get out there and do that. I don't know yet. I might just do the Trevellyn Reserve. That's quite close, and I can like your Mount Wellington, there's lots of really cool trails in there, and some of them are very steep, so they're good at emulating the Gone Nuts experience, I think.
Yeah, they are very steep there, absolutely. You should get into Walls of Jerusalem though.
Oh, I've hiked in there a number of times. I have never run in there. I need to do that.
That is so that standard loop in Walls of Jerusalem, that 29K loop, is actually it's pretty cruisy as a bush jog.
Once you get up,
because you've got 2.5K that you've got to walk up, and then you do the loop, and you can do it in either way. I'd probably go up to Dixon's Kingdom first, because that gets all the climb out of the way, and then you come round, and that's just wild. And that's actually not that far from Launceston. I'm often very jealous of people up in Launceston because they have access to all these things that I have to drive like 4 hours to get to.
Well, I actually have done a little bit of Mount Wellington, but a lot of the people I talk to on the podcast come from Hobart, and they just talk about going out their back door and straight up Mount Wellington. So I'm like, that's a bit close.
It is, and I mean, there are lots of good trails around there, but there are lots of good trails all over Tassie. The Mount Rufus circuit's a really good one as well.
Okay, I'm going to take
down
note
at
of
Lake
that.
St Clair.
Right.
And just the Rock the Cradle loop. Most of those wilder trails are pretty good.
Yeah.
The I don't I don't like the Penguin one. I think that's a bit contrived myself, but that's all right.
The Penguin to Cradle trail?
Oh no,
No.
the dialed
The dial range. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Part of the dial range.
The dial range is one. That wilder trail I don't like. All the others are really good. That one's a definite outlier. But all of those are really good trail runs, and you don't have to link them all together.
Well, my coach is actually Amy from Lampret.
Oh, Amy, yeah,
so
yeah.
I can.
You can chat to Amy.
Which one should I do? She'll probably put that into my schedule.
I know. Yeah, I know Amy quite well.
I thought you would. Yes. All being of the same ilk, and this being Tasmania.
Yeah.
So there you go. All right. Thank you, Iestyn. It's been amazing to get to know you a little bit more. Don't jump off straight away, but as I'll say goodbye to you off the recording as well. But massive thanks. Really appreciate you sharing time with us and sharing some of your adventures. It's been awesome.
Thanks for asking me. I've inspired myself now. It's good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast. I'd love to talk to you about your running journey. Send me a message on Facebook or on the website and let's do it. I also wanted to let you know that I've created an email list so you won't miss any podcast episodes. You'll find details in the show notes and on the FitMIND FitBODY website, along with a bunch of resources on mindful running. They'll help you to get and stay mentally and physically fit. And I'll see you there. Plus, I'll be back here in your podcast player a few times a week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review. It'll help more people to find the podcast and get inspired to start running and ultimately to improve their life. See you soon.